Hey folks, if you are just joining us for the first time, welcome on in. We are working on this T-34 85. We started this last week, and this week we're going to be doing some weathering and adding a beautiful set of resin figures as riders. So to start, we're going to be doing a pin wash, and this time we're going to be using dark wash from Ammo, just because this is a darker tank with the 4BO Russian green on here. We don't want to use any kind of a brownish color because it'll just make it look like dirt grime. We actually want it to have a little more contrast this time. So we're going to be adding this pin wash in all of our crevices, all of our nuts and bolts that we meticulously highlighted during the last video. And if you didn't see that video, I will leave a link in the description for you guys to go check that out. So if you take a look here, what we're doing is we're putting some wash in all of the recessed areas, along all the raised edges, all over the nuts and bolts, just everywhere where we want to bring out the details in this beautiful tank we have here in front of us. So again, you can see how we put that dark wash over top of them highlighted nuts and bolts, and we don't lose the detail of the bolts. They actually still stand out, which is the whole point of why we did that. So you can see after you put down your panel liner, you're going to want to come back with some enamel thinner and just blend and clean up any edges, or maybe any places where you put a little bit too much down. Usually where you first touch along the panel lines is where you're going to want to come back and clean up with that enamel thinner. And again, you can see that done really well on the engine deck. Now I wanted to come back and go over all of the stowage bits. So we have a couple tarps. I just wanted to add the same wash in, and it's kind of almost acting like a filter, just so they don't stand out too much on the tank because they are a little bright. So again, we want to wash that, and it also brings out some of the details in those folds that we made. And again, same thing on top of the fuel drums on the sides, and also on top of the turret. Again, we want to make sure we bring out all the little details that are molded onto this model, including the weld beads here. So I did not put these weld beads on myself. They were on the kit, and I thought they were really well done. So why make extra work for ourselves just for the sake of extra work? So again, just going over all the little details, including this we did add the cut flame marks on the gun mantlet. So also want to carry that onto the wheels as well. Now this is going to be a muddy scene, so some of this is going to get covered up, but we want to make sure that we do this first, just so we have a good base to cover up later. So I wanted to come back with a brown wash for German dark yellow over top of this tan tarp that we made, this like sand colored tarp, just because again it was a little bright and I wanted to darken it up a little bit. And then using this light rust wash, I went over the one steel piece that we have here on the front with these tracks that are going to look nice and rusty, the spare tracks. Again, looks really good. So the next step, I want to do some more rusting following the rust wash. So we want to rust the exhaust, and you guys saw this on my Whip It video. Again, you guys, if you didn't see that, I can put that link in the description, how we start with some darker rust pigments, and then we go over with a light rust enamel wash, because how you activate pigments is by using enamel thinner, which all a wash is pigment and enamel thinner mixed. So what you're doing is you're just adding in some colored enamel thinner, and that actually activates the pigment and binds it fast to your model. What's nice though is it doesn't completely glue it fast, so to speak, and that you can still move it around after the fact. So here's what we're doing, is coming back in with a couple layers of the dark, and then adding a layer of the light rust pigments, and then again coming over with that light rust wash, and it just actually builds up a textured effect as well. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some chipping. So I decided to simply just go with the highlight color rather than going even lighter, because anything much lighter than this highlight's just going to look white and it just won't look right. So we're just going to do this chipping using the sponge method. So what you do is you take a piece of sponge, something very fine sponge, think like a staining brush or something like that, and cut a piece off. And then you're going to dab some paint that's mixed with paint retarder, and you're just going to dab most of it off on a paper towel or something nearby, and then go over all these edges. And this might take a little while to get the hang of. I know I struggle with it in the beginning until you get the right amount of dabbing the paint off onto a napkin or something. But once you get a hang of it, it'll be so much fun, and it'll save you so much time. The results are really great. But again, you might want to have like a spare model or something, or spare piece of plastic to just practice on until you get the hang of it. But again, this is going to save you so much time in the beginning, and what it essentially does is it creates the canvas for the next step, which again, take a look at this turret. You can see how quickly we were able to chip that. Now this next step is to come back with, I like using this German camo black brown with the paint retarder as well, and we're just using a really thin brush, and essentially what we're doing is using that light sponge chipping as kind of the background. It literally will tell you where to chip the paint, because we're gonna do the steel chips inside of those light chips, right? So that's why we put the light chips down first. So again, you literally have a canvas, so the sponge chipping is going to tell you where to chip your steel, which makes it so much easier. You're essentially just following your own light paint chips and just going over it with steel. I just like to fill those in, and then when you go around hatches, you can add a bit more, just because, you know, think these hatches are going to be open and closed. They might not fit exactly perfectly, and you're going to get paint chips on the end from handling, from opening and closing. So you can add a little bit more around the doors and whatnot. And it is really important to have a very pointy brush, as well as using that paint retarder. If you tried using it with like watered down paint, just using water or just using paint straight out the bottle, you will not get these kinds of results. You need to thin it down with the paint retarder. It also helps it from drying out too fast, but again, the biggest thing is the paint retarder actually acts as a flow improver and will help you get those really tiny chips and details you want. It really is a critical piece to this, as I learned, and I'm going to talk more about the paint retarder here in a little while, because I also learned how critical it is for a glazing stage later on. So again, just finishing up all this chipping and just showing you, this is one of the longest stages of the weathering step, is actually having to chip it, because you have to chip every single spot with that brush. So again, depending on how long you have to do a model or how long you want to spend on it, you can change this methodology around a little bit, or maybe just make a little bit less on the light chip side of things, and then you can save yourself a lot of time because you don't have as much of a map, so to speak, to work with. But again, that's totally up to you, and these models will look fine whether they're heavily chipped or not. So again, just coming through and doing all those chips, and here we can kind of see the final result on the turret, especially where the crew would be. We want to make sure we take care of that. So at this point now we're ready for some mud, and I wanted to add some more texture, because I know with the Whippet I added a little bit of texture just with pigments, but that was kind of like a dusty scene, not so much a muddy scene. And same thing with the Panther. I wasn't happy with the textures I got on the Panther. So what you do is you take some of this acrylic diorama paint, which has really great muddy, thick, textures to it, and it is an acrylic, so it dries really quick. I don't mean in a few seconds, it dries in a few minutes, and it's so perfect for what we want to do here. So if you don't have some of this and you want to do some mud, this is the way to go. I mean, these results speak for themselves. It's just a really nice mud texture. Now, I didn't like the grayish color of the turned earth, so I just took some earth color by MIG. Again, this is an enamel, okay? So I've switched to enamels at this point, and I'm spraying this enamel over that grayish turned earth. Now, I tried spraying an enamel with the paint with the airbrush, and it had good results to start, but then I started getting issues. So I switched over to the brush, and I definitely would recommend just sticking with the brush with enamels. Don't try airbrushing it like I did. Learn from my mistake. It really was a waste of time, just because I clogged up my airbrush really bad and had to clean it pretty good to get all the chunks out. So again, went over everything with the paintbrush with the different kinds of earth tones. Now the enamels, the downside is they take a lot longer to dry than the acrylics, so I switched over to putting pigment on the top of the tank here, and this is exactly what you guys saw me do on the Whippet, right? So I'm just building up the effect using the pigments, and this is going to look like dust and accumulated dirt on the top of the tank. Now I didn't want to go super heavy with the dust and dirt on top of the tank because we're going to have riders on here, so that's why we definitely see dust and dirt up here, but not so much the thick heavy mud, just because these tanks weren't super duper fast, so they weren't slinging mud all over the top of themselves, unlike the World War I tanks, which just were getting bombarded with whatever was hitting the ground around them and slinging mud on top of them. That and the tracks were the tank. So a little bit different of a situation here with this T-34. So again, just going over and building up that effect using pigments, and then what you see me putting down is just enamel thinner straight out the bottle on a brush, just putting that down to bind it in place. And again, like I said earlier, the reason I like this technique so much is because it's so easy to work with, and if you don't like the effect even after you put the enamel thinner on, you can still move the pigment afterwards. It's still movable. It's not hard glued fast like super glue or something. You can actually bring a brush in and move it after the fact. You can move it really whenever you want. Now at the same time, that means if you like to touch your model a lot later, it's not necessarily the greatest option because it will come off, but the effect will still stick around. Again, it's up to you what you want to do. So after the enamels had some time to dry, I came back with the fresh mud, which just adds a nice dark brown color in here. So you can actually see there's 3 different textures in here. We have the background texture of the mud. We added in some damp earth, which has a bit of a gloss effect to it, and then we added in this fresh mud, which also has a gloss effect to it to simulate the wetness of the mud that's in there. And again, you can see I was just slowly building up and adding some visual texture in there. So I also did do this same step to the wheels. So I came in and just kind of packed that mud on the inside of the wheel, the steel part itself, and then again to color it I added the earth, and then came back in with the fresh mud look. So same thing as we did on the underside of the hull, just to the wheels to make it match. And I really loved how these turned out with the caked in mud in there. It just looks so good. Now I know you're going to notice that there's not a lot of mud on the rubber tire part, but we'll come back to that and you'll see why. So again, same treatment to the tracks. So we started with the acrylic texture, adding in the earth, and then after that dried, because again these enamels take a couple hours to really dry, came in with the wet mud. So then I also wanted to do some dry brushing with the silver, like you guys have seen me do on the Panther tank. Come in on those guide horns and just give it that polished look like it would have. And then again waiting for everything to dry on the tracks. Came in with some fuel stains and actually put that down on these fuel tanks and kind of did some nice streaking effects, just as if they had spilled oil, I guess it would be fuel, right? If they spilled fuel, or maybe some of it leaked out or what have you during travel and the bumpy roads and whatnot. Just kind of simulating that just for a little more visual texture to it. And then I finally got this streaking grime down. I practiced for a while on my model because yes, even I do that on my spare model I have here that I practice on. This streaking grime has always been a struggle for me to get it to look the way I want it to. So you can see what I did was I just built up the effect using the same kind of methodology, but you see it doesn't flow as much as a wash does. It kind of almost goes down like almost like a watered down acrylic. And then what I did is after I put down the streaks I wanted, I came back with enamel thinner, cleaned up the top part, and then took a flat brush to actually make those streaks. And for the first time I was actually really happy with my streaks that I made. So I did the same thing on the bottom of this hatch again, because this is a service hatch for the transmission, and then the engine's on the back side of that transmission. So I got this ash black a while ago. This is an ink from Ammo, and this is the first time I used it for exhaust, and I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner, but I absolutely love this for the soot of the exhaust and also for the barrel on the gun. This by far is my favorite methodology now. I like this better than black pigments. I like it better than just black acrylics because it naturally gives you this shadow effect because of the ink, because it's so thin. I absolutely loved it. So I'm definitely going to be using that from now on. So going back, I wanted to add some speckling using a toothpick and a thicker brush with some of this damp earth. Again, one of the things I found, and I think if you recall from my Panther video, this damp earth does not like to thin down, or sorry, does not like to go down without thinning. You actually have to put some enamel thinner in it to get it to go, but it does have some very subtle textures to it, which adds more, again, visual textures to our model, which is what we want. So at this point I could fit the tires on and we can see how nice that looks, and then also the tracks. So now we have the running gear on. It is funny to say tires, because these tanks could actually run without tracks because they actually had treaded tires on. So again, now you're going to see why I didn't put mud on the inside of the tracks or on the tires, because I wanted to wait till I had it together so I could kind of see how it would all come together. So you can see I'm just taking some damp earth and kind of blending in the edge of the tracks and then blending in the edge of the rubber part of the tires. Because the inside of the rubber tires, they wouldn't get, they'd have mud on them, but it wouldn't stick fast. It would come off just like the inside of the track. So now we're going to move on to the riders that we have. So I actually mistakenly thought this was a crew that it came with. I don't know why I thought that, but they're all infantry riders. So we're going to start with our zenithal highlight, and I like using cream of ice because it's not so desaturated. It's actually like an off-white color, and you can see how it just brings out all the shadows, all the wonderful details on these resin figures. And I will say, these resin figures aren't perfect by any means. I mean, coming from 3D printing, I can see some of the lines and whatnot on them, but overall, for the scale they are, I'm really happy with them. So I didn't have a specific color for their uniforms on hand. So I kind of looked at some reference photos and picked this light green khaki, which I thought it looks really bright green in some angles of light, but it actually is like a light greenish brown. So I think it's a really nice color, and I wanted something that would contrast with the tank and not blend in. So that's why I chose this lighter green color. And you can see what I'm doing is it's almost like I'm spraying a colored zenithals. I'm spraying it from the top. And I am coming from the sides and bottom as well, but it's very thin layers with that airbrush, so that way we take advantage of that zenithal lighting. So then while I was at it, I used some masking putty and covered up everything but the boots, just so I could spray some old rust on it, which is a really nice leather color to bring out them leather boots. I just thought this really worked out well with that masking, and it's a much quicker solution than taping and untaping, so at least I felt it was. So again, continuing with the old rust, I went over all their leather parts on these figures, which is like belts and straps and what have you. Mostly what they had on was belts and straps. I know this one character here had a backpack as well here, where you can see a satch pack, whatever you want to call it. So it had a little bit more of the leather parts to it. And then specifically on this guy, I wanted to come back with like a sand color and paint that bag again, just so it kind of stands out a little bit more off of the model. So again, just adding more and more colors and visual texture. So doing the belt buckles and stuff in gunmetal silver, just again add some silver in there. So then I came back with dull green, and I did the sash that some of these infantrymen wear. Now I don't know the purpose behind it. I'm sure somebody can tell me in the comments, but I wanted to add a different color of green to again make it stand out. And then I came over with my flesh colors. So I'm trying to take what I learned in the larger scale figure modeling, and again I have a few videos to share if you guys are interested in larger scale models. And you can see how I do my flesh tones there, and I tried to copy that here. I will say I wasn't overly happy with the results from the airbrush, and I think it was mostly just because of how small these models are, or maybe I just need more practice on the smaller figures. It's much easier to do the airbrushing on the larger figures than it was on these small ones. I just couldn't get consistent coverage for whatever reason, so I ended up going over to glazing. So what you saw me do with the airbrush was I used just a natural flesh from the top to take advantage of the zenithal, and then I took a medium flesh to come in to do the shadows. So again, I said earlier I would talk about the paint retarder and the importance of it, and this is where it comes in. It's incredibly crucial. You have to use your paint colors with paint retarder, and that's how you can glaze this. So once I got the 3 colors down for the skin, I came back and did a little bit of white for the eyes, like an off-white cream of ice, and then I used black for the pupils. And I was able to give them all pupils, and none of them are looking cross-eyed or squint, so I was happy with that. So again, coming back after I painted this skin, I took care of their little hat that they're wearing and the little Soviet star that's on their hat. And you can see even this guy, he had really small eyes, and I still got a pupil in there. So I wanted to make them feel like they fit in with the scene, so I added some first Europe Earth pigments, and then I came back with that damp earth on the bottom of their boots, and then also added in some of the texture from that turned earth acrylic paste that we used. And then once I had that done, I glued on their heads. And from here we get to, first off, look at our beautiful models. Again, these turned out really great. And then the last step before we take a look at this is we have to give them their weapons. So I did have them painted in gunmetal and then light wood, and I used that German brown for dark yellow wash, and then glued those into place. And now we are ready to put these beautiful figures onto our tank. And that is the last step we need to do before we call this model finished. Thank you guys for hanging in there till the end. I hope you liked what you saw. If you did, please leave a like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe, as we're going to be putting this thing on a beautiful vignette with a lovely muddy mess and a winter thaw. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that wonderful next video that we'll be putting together here in the next couple of days. Thanks again, and also feel free to check out my Patreon if you'd like to see more.